Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. Israel and Lebanon agree to a 10-day ceasefire as President Trump signals possible major progress with Iran on nuclear material.
President Trump visiting two battleground states, highlighting Republican-backed tax cuts ahead of the midterms as Republicans work to maintain their majority in Congress.
Republican House majority narrows as Democrat Analilia Meja wins New Jersey's 11th district in a special election.
The acting director of ICE is stepping down at the end of May. Todd Lyons leaving the agency after a year on the job.
6 days after the splashdown of NASA's Artemis 2 mission, the four astronauts discussed the impact the historic lunar flyby had on them personally.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Morning, thanks for joining us.
Today's Friday, April 17th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. In today's top news, major developments from the Middle East. Israel and Lebanon entering into a 10-day ceasefire.
That's right. President Trump saying the brief pause of violence began after conversations with the Lebanese president and Israeli prime minister. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on that, plus a possible willingness from Iran to hand over their nuclear material.
Residents firing barrages of gunshots into the air to celebrate the beginning of the 10-day truce agreed on by Lebanon and Israel. Others held up victory signs as they drove into southern Lebanon. In one Lebanese city, cars honked with crowds cheering and singing. Yesterday's ceasefire announcement follows rare talks earlier this week between the countries in Washington, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. It was the first time leaders from the neighboring countries met in person in the U.S. Capitol for 34 years. President Trump ordering top officials to work toward what he called lasting peace. Writing on Truth Social, this would be the 10th conflict he has helped resolve, and get it done. Adding, may have been a historic day for Lebanon. Good things are happening. The State Department says Lebanon, with international support, is expected to take steps to prevent Hezbollah and other armed groups from launching attacks on Israel. On Iran-backed terror group Hezbollah, President Trump writing, I hope Hezbollah acts nicely and well during this important period of time. It will be a great moment for them if they do. No more killing. Must finally have peace. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the ceasefire creates an opening for a broader agreement while maintaining Israel's core demands, disarming Hezbollah and securing long-term peace.
We have an opportunity to reach a historic peace agreement with Lebanon. President Trump intends to invite me and the president of Lebanon in order to try to advance this agreement.
Meanwhile, President Trump signaling progress on a separate track, saying a second round of peace talks between the United States and Iran could take place this weekend.
We're doing very well, I can tell you. Maybe it'll happen before that. I'm not sure it needs to be extended. Just so you know, Iran wants to make a deal, and we're dealing very nicely with them.
The president saying Iran is willing to do things today that they weren't willing to do 2 months ago regarding nukes.
So very important is that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, and they've agreed to that. Iran's agreed to that, and they've agreed to it very powerfully. They've agreed to give us back the nuclear dust that's way underground because of the attack we made with the B-2 bombers.
Meanwhile, in Vegas, the president projecting optimism about a peace deal with Iran.
We're going to have victory very shortly. This is not... And against a very tough, smart country. We haven't settled yet. Maybe we won't, but I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised.
Potential peace talks with Iran this weekend would come just days before the expiration of a 2-week ceasefire. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thanks to Daniel for that morning report. And now joining us to discuss this Israel-Lebanon ceasefire is Rebecca Grant. She's vice president at the Lexington Institute, as well as a national security analyst. Good morning, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining us. My most immediate question, and perhaps a naive one on my part, is that I thought Israel was not warring with the representative Lebanese government, but the Iran proxy and terrorist organization Hezbollah. Since the ceasefire in D.C. was negotiated by the Lebanese government, what guarantees does Israel have that Hezbollah will honor this agreement that they're not a party to?
Well, that is actually the exact right question. And you've seen Netanyahu try to be reassuring to the Israelis that, if he needs to, he'll still continue to take action. But remember, there was actually a ceasefire agreement put in place in late 2024. And the Lebanese armed forces did a little bit of disarming of Hezbollah. But then it all fell apart, and Iran was still able to support Hezbollah. Well, all that has changed. And so two big things have happened here. First, Lebanon's president has kind of gone against some of the Hezbollah factions in Lebanon's government to agree to these talks and to send the ambassador for the talks with Secretary Rubio. That is just incredibly important. And second, now Iran is not in a position to continue to supply money to Hezbollah. And that really makes it possible for this to take the next step. The Lebanese armed forces are going to have to continue their disarmament, but I think we will see some high-level talks and more of an accord between Israel and Lebanon.
Yeah, with that, you sort of answered my next question, which was if the Lebanese government can indeed rein in Hezbollah, does this breakthrough suggest that Lebanon was giving support to Hezbollah previously? But you mentioned, of course, maybe with Iran out of the picture, that maybe more emboldens the Lebanese government to be able to lever over Hezbollah?
Yes, and it's so complicated. The Speaker of the Parliament, Nabi Berri, is a well-known Hezbollah IRGC operative, and the president of Lebanon has actually gone against that faction in order to get these talks going. So what we do want to see is more leverage and power by the legitimate government of Lebanon, and then disarming Hezbollah. And by this, I mean the Lebanese armed forces are starting this now in Beirut to literally, take away the guns. It's a difficult task, but made possible partly by the Israeli airstrikes over the past few years that targeted the Hezbollah leadership and Hezbollah's weapons caches. Now, that said, there were a couple 100,000 rockets, missiles, you name it, stuffed in there with Hezbollah in Lebanon. So it's been an incredibly difficult problem. But I think we have a better chance now than we've seen in quite a long time. President Trump says he wants this to be the 10th war that he's settled, and he's certainly taking steps to make it happen. Also, this takes away a big sticking point from the U.S.-Iran talks because Iran wanted the Hezbollah peace taken care of, and it looks like President Trump, Secretary Rubio have made that happen.
Yeah, when you think about the rank and file in Hezbollah, because it seems like their leadership has taken significant losses over the last few weeks, are they more motivated sort of by jihad, or is this just, incentives? This is how they earn their living. The money flows had been flowing in from Iran. Does changing their incentive structure ultimately change their alliances, or is this more about jihad for these Hezbollah fighters?
Oh, the money is important too. Certainly ideology, a big component, but we are turning off that spigot of aid and money coming in through the IRGC to its Hezbollah client. The blockade that is cutting off Iran's ability to sell oil, all this ripples through because, the IRGC is a business operation. So when you take that away to the rank and file Hezbollah operatives on the ground in Lebanon, as you said, their incentive structure can change. And that has to happen in order to get President Trump's larger vision of peace extending through the Middle East.
And operationally, how does the ceasefire work in terms of security guarantees?
Very, very, very tough. I mean, what we really want to see is a pulling back from what is the southern Lebanon, northern Israeli border so that the Israeli forces are able to come back. The Lebanese forces are able to go, where they're supposed to be. The Hezbollah forces are pulling back as well. And then we want to see no rocket fire, no missile fire coming out of Lebanon from Hezbollah down towards Israel. Okay, there may be one or two here or there, but we want to see real quiet during this 10-day ceasefire in order for that to set the framework for additional negotiations between Lebanon and Israel.
And just as we start to finish up in our last 30 seconds, Rebecca, is this an Egypt or Jordan moment for Israel and Lebanon?
It could be. It might take a little more time, but this is the best sign of progress, really, in decades, all made possible by the Israeli strikes against Hezbollah and, of course, by Operation Epic Fury, finishing off Iran's ability to sponsor terrorism.
Does seem like an incredible turning point. We'll have to watch and see. Rebecca Grant, thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
And next, the Pentagon says the U.S. has turned around 14 vessels that were heading to or from Iran since the start of the U.S. naval blockade. Military leaders explained yesterday how the blockade operates, targeting only Iran while still supporting American partners in the Gulf region. Joining us now to discuss the Strait of Hormuz is Captain James Fennell. He's a former director of intelligence with the U.S. Navy's Pacific Fleet. Thank you for joining us, Captain Fennell, this morning. We're entering, of course, the fifth day at 10 a.m. this morning of the U.S. naval blockade. It has started with the Iranian coastline, but yesterday was announced that it's now global. So what stands out to you about the way the U.S. is approaching this naval blockade?
Well, thanks for having me on. And I would say that this approach is global. As the chairman of the Joint Chiefs briefed yesterday at the Pentagon, it's not only Central Command that is conducting this blockade at the southern end of the Strait of Hormuz, but we're now having other combatant commanders, and they specifically called out U.S. Indo-Pacific Command that will be looking to conduct maritime interdiction operations against any vessels that would be identified that would be conducting activities that would bring illegal contraband items into Iran. Or seek to extract oil from Iran. But really, it's something that would come out of largely China or other nations, maybe North Korea, that would try to ship some kind of illegal supplies or things. There's a long list of items that have been identified and the U.S. has put out that would cause concern, and those ships would be dealt with in the Indo-Pacific theater. So this is a global agenda. Same could be said for Russia. European Command would be available to do the same thing. We have assets in the Mediterranean. So the idea is to make sure that Iran is not going to violate the terms of the blockade, and that they're not going to be able to sell oil to get funds, or they're not going to be supplied with illegal materials to maybe expand their military capabilities that have been decimated over the first 40 plus days of Operation Epic Fury.
And Captain Fennell, pardon the pun, but this seems like uncharted waters. I can't remember in my lifetime when such a large-scale naval blockade was implemented. With your experience in the Navy, is this something that there is precedent for, or is this something that there's a lot of operational training and planning for, but this is somewhat a new exercise within the last generation?
Well, I think the scale of what we're doing probably we'd not seen before our lifetimes in World War II, where we were, in death fight with the Nazi Germany, Imperial Japanese Navy. So we were addressing their activities around the world, and there was actions around the world. In terms of the training today, our Navy is trained in this. So no matter whether they're Pacific Fleet assets or Atlantic Fleet assets, our naval ships are trained to do blockade maneuvers, blockade operations, visit, board, search, and seizure training, the ability to hail and how to communicate, and as well as our naval intelligence community knows how to track vessels at sea around the world. And we have the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington, and each one of our combatant commands has the Navy components with their naval maritime operations centers supported by their intel teams that are fully engaged in tracking and communicating the locations of both naval vessels plus commercial shipping vessels, and even the dark ones as well. So there's a lot going into this, and we have the training and experience to do it. And what we're focused on, and what was very clear from the briefings and from what the direction from the president is, we're focused on isolating Iran. So freedom of navigation is open in the Strait, even though it may not have returned to pre-war levels. But ships that want to leave from any of the Gulf Cooperation Council states, they can come and go. It's just ships that are leaving and departing Iranian waters with Iranian oil or trying to get into Iran, they will be stopped and turned around.
And you mentioned some of these dark fleet activities. How does China come into the picture with the war more broadly, but then specifically as this naval blockade has been in effect now for 5 days?
Right. So each ship has over a certain tonnage, a small tonnage number, but these large vessels that carry crude oil and things of that nature, or cargo ships, they have an automated identification system, AIS, and you're supposed to be transmitting that so people can know who you are. It's a safety feature so that we don't have collisions at sea. What's happened since the sanctions have come in over the last couple of years against both Russia, Iran, Venezuela, there's been a new industry of tanker ships that are largely owned by China and Russia are turning off their AIS and transmitting around without identifying themselves, or using false identification, spoofing their AIS, trying to get around the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, and those sanctions. So there are sanctions out there that say these ships are illegally transmitting oil from Iran. We know who they are, so they try to get around that by going dark. And there are other ways to track vessels, even if they turn off their AIS. Can't go into those details, but we do that. And so we're using all of our assets, both national assets and tactical assets there in theater, to be able to sort out who's transmitting correctly and who's transmitting falsely, and those will be identified and turned around.
That's really a fascinating breakdown. So in essence, we knew this was happening. I wouldn't say turned a blind eye to it, but we really didn't take aggressive action to stop it. And so is it the first time that we've really laid down the law on enforcing that sort of registration process for maritime activity, as you're describing?
No, we were doing it in Venezuela during Operation Absolute Resolve. So we were essentially doing this kind of operation where we were stopping the dark fleet. At the time, our posture and policy with respect to Iran wasn't at the point where it is now. Now we're at this point where the president's directed we're going to really cinch this down and we're going to really enforce it ourselves. Before, we were asking other nations to help participate in that process by notifying them of OFAC, ships that are on the OFAC list. And that didn't obviously work to a great extent. So now we're doing it with our own fleet, and they're balling up the southern end of the Strait of Hormuz. So we have done this. We'll continue to do it. It's laborious in some sense, but I think as the chairman and the CENTCOM commander briefed yesterday, it's working. And despite the reports out there, and I watched early this morning here, lots of people saying, well, this ship got through or that ship got through. And I would advise people not to focus on individual one ship here, one ship there, but notice the larger pattern. And what we're seeing is Europe came out and said we only have 6 days of jet fuel left. We have even today in the Chinese press statements about how it was they went on the other side and said, well, we're doing quite well. There's no impact to us. But clearly there is an impact to China and Asia in terms of this blockade. And it's going to increase until pressure is brought to bear on Iran to meet the negotiation points that were brought up and discussed in Islamabad last week.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. We understand that there were 14 ships turned around. My understanding is that they were attempting to leave the Iranian coast, and they chose wisely to return to port. In terms of trying to bring goods into Iran and these false flag ships, are you aware of activity where we've made any interdictions?
I have not seen that we have conducted any interdictions to date. Everybody has complied with the verbal hailings from our naval platforms. But General Kane was very clear, I think, yesterday in saying that if somebody fails to comply, that they're authorized to use warning shots. So the use of lethal force is in this continuum of training that our Navy sailors and officers have, is to be able to, ask the ship to turn around. If it doesn't, and then it says, well, we're going to board you. If they try to escape, then, warning shots, and it can go up and escalate from there. So we would prefer not to do that. I think, prudence on these ship captains has been, commendable. But at some point, especially next Tuesday when the ceasefire essentially is supposed to end, we'll see what happens. But if we go back to any kind of kinetic operations, we need to watch out for an Iranian response. They have not tried so far very heavily to do anything to break through this yet. And I would just say, there's been a lot of report and talks of mines, and so far there's not been one verified report of a mine in the Arabian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf of Oman up to this point, even despite those reports. And we sent 2 U.S. Navy destroyers a few days ago through the Strait of Hormuz. Typically not the kind of platform that you would send through if you thought there was a minefield. You would lead with minesweeping platforms, and we didn't do that. So my assessment is while we're not being imprudent, we are making sure that we demonstrate to the international shipping community that things aren't as dire as Iran has tried to make them look.
And Captain Fennell, as we start to finish up, one thing out of the briefing yesterday kind of caught me a little off guard, where Admiral Cooper described the 4 greatest air forces, 3 of them being the U.S.'s. I've never really thought about our air capacity outside of the Air Force. What is the Navy's capability, and how is air support helping with the blockade?
Yeah, it caught my attention too when he indicated and separated out naval aviation, U.S. Navy aviation, and Marine Corps aviation, and they are 2 separate wings. But what we bring in combination with our Air Force brothers is we have aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, and then we have amphibious assault helicopter Tripoli. They both carry various fighter aircraft, FN-18s, F-35s. They have helicopters, and so the helicopters are very, very useful in this kind of spotting and sorting and being able to provide verbal direction and in the range that a ship can be in one location, and it can have helicopters that can go out and cover a larger area around it and be able to challenge and confront those ships verbally. So your pictures there are great graphics to show that we have big deck, we call them big deck platforms, both the aircraft carrier, the conventional aircraft carrier, and our amphibious assault helicopter carrier. So we have helicopters, fighter aircraft that join with the Air Force's fighters, bombers, refueling aircraft, and most importantly at this point, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft like the P-8 and the RC-135 that can fly around and collect intelligence and provide that data to these operation centers to make sure they have all a common operational picture to know where all these platforms are at, and then direct the assets to go and do visuals on the ones that are high risk.
Well, very interesting to hear about all of that. Again, I had just thought about the Air Force, so appreciate you sharing your expertise with us this morning. Captain James Fennell, great to speak with you.
Thank you.
With the U.S. Navy enforcing a blockade of Iranian ports, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth made clear that America is locked and loaded and ready to resume combat operations if Iran rejects a deal. Joining us now for analysis is national security and Middle East analyst Shayan Sami. Good to have you with us again this morning, Shayan. Walk us through what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth actually said yesterday and how serious is the threat?
Good morning, Steph. Good morning, Carrie, and thanks for having me again. Secretary Hegseth yesterday talked a lot about the blockade that has taken place at the Strait of Hormuz, and he was reaffirming the fact that the Iranian military has basically lost its power. However, when you combine that with President Trump's assertions that we are in negotiation, things are going very well, and we might have an agreement, that causes a little bit of a trepidation amongst the opposition groups in Iran, and also what Secretary Hegseth has said militarily. Because I understand the president is trying to create or drive a wedge among some of the European countries who are meeting today to talk about ways to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, albeit after the conflict is over. and they're not including the United States. So President Trump wants to create some kind of disarray in that. But Secretary Hegseth's assertions have been taken in its context within the Iranian groups, that he is actually saying the bombings and the military campaign is going to restart, because his language was quite threatening and quite mighty with the American bravado that has taken place so far. Now, Secretary Hegseth has the right to come out and talk about what American military power is, but when he is talking about bombings and the blockade, whereas the president is talking about negotiations and discussions, that just causes a little confusion. However, this is what the Trump administration believes it can do, or it must be doing, to create some kind of doubt amongst the leadership, or whatever is left of it, in the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, and so far, what is the public or official reaction from the regime to Hegseth's comments?
You know, they have been mum. They have been mute on this topic. And I believe rightly so, because they're trying to see what comes out of the White House and what the president is saying, how much should they give credence to that, and then what credence they should give to Secretary Hegseth's statement. And on top of that, let's not forget that they are not in a position to make a ratified decision, because even in Islamabad last Saturday, they held a long conversation, roughly 21 hours. And then at the end, somebody from Tehran called the Secretary General of the National Security Council, called them back to Tehran and said, no more negotiations. So it's actually, they also don't know what they can talk about, or who is the actual person that could straight up say the Iranian perspective. And that's why they are keeping it quiet. And at the same time, the Iranian government, the Pezeshkian administration, has been rendered useless and feckless. Nobody listens to them. And even the parliament speaker, who's only one of the constitutional officers in that apparatus, has basically taken the lead, but the IRGC is not in agreement with him. So decision-making, as you can see, is rather flawed and incapable of sticking to one message.
Yeah, it hasn't really been clear at this point who is in charge. What's your sense of that?
Well, you nailed it, because right now we have a parliament speaker who is a former law enforcement forces commander, who is also a former IRGC Air Force commander, but he is not in compliant or in sync with the current IRGC commander. Why? Because Calif, the parliament speaker, wants to wrest control for himself and wants to basically name himself the next leader of Iran, as the fate of the supreme leader is unknown. He has never been seen in public after the assassination or the killing of his father. And reportedly, the currently elected speaker, supreme leader Mojtaba Khamenei, he is nowhere to be seen, and he's severely injured. So Calif is trying to position himself as the next in charge person, but he doesn't have the backing of the IRGC, because the IRGC commander, Ahmad Vahidi, wants to put himself in a position of power. All of that you put together, and then you have the dilemma of how to reconcile with the hardliners that say, never, ever talk to the United States, who's responsible for killing Qasem Soleimani, one of their military commanders of the Quds Force, and their supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. So when you have all of this combination, you really don't find a good enough person that could talk and their words would matter or mean something. Hence, when President Trump talks about negotiations, I have a hard time agreeing with that, because In Iran, there is no one person or no group that can say something and let it matter. So I think President Trump is just trying to manage the situation outside and also to calm the markets, because he needs to have a control over the market before finishing the job in Tehran.
And just to get your quick sense of which of those options, if any, would be better for the U.S., and also taking a look at China's support for Iran at this point, not just coming through the Strait of Hormuz, coming overland and other seas, and how the U.S. might be able to tackle that at the same time.
Instead of telling you what I think, Steph, I'll let you know what the people of Iran are thinking. The people of Iran are thinking that the current regime in its entirety, left, right, center, they are stooges of China and Russia. They do not hold the people of Iran at heart. They hold their own interests at heart. And therefore, none of them are good enough options for the United States. Why? Because when you sit across the table and negotiate with somebody, number one, you realize that you have a disagreement that you want to resolve. And number two, you want to make sure that that person has the authority to come up with what they promise. Right now, there is nobody in the Iranian apparatus. The people do not have any level of trust in this entirety of leadership or cast of characters, because they are not keeping the people of Iran in mind, and they have killed 42,000 people, innocent people, just for them to stay in power. Therefore, I think the best way is to get rid of this regime.
All right, great to have your insights this morning. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Cheyenne Sami.
Thank you.
President Trump spotlighting tax cuts during a stop in Las Vegas.
The push coming ahead of the midterms as Republicans are working to maintain their slim majority in the Congress.
Welcome back. President Trump is taking his economic message on the road, making stops in key battleground states ahead of the midterms.
The president promoting last year's Republican tax cuts in Las Vegas yesterday as the party works to hold onto its narrow majorities in both chambers of Congress. Here's more on that.
President Trump heads west with stops in two key battleground states ahead of the midterm elections. The president speaking in Las Vegas, Nevada, highlighting Republican-backed tax cuts passed last year.
Last summer, thanks to our Republican majorities in the House and Senate, I signed the great big beautiful bill, the largest tax cuts and many other things for working families in the history of our country.
That law extends the president's 2017 tax cuts and includes several of his campaign promises. The push comes as Republicans work to protect narrow majorities in Congress. The trip coming just after the IRS tax filing deadline, with the president spotlighting the impact of the tax cuts.
The average refunds this season is over $4,000. And here in Las Vegas, many workers have reported refunds of $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 or more, and they've never had anything. It's all from no tax on tips alone.
The measure also includes eliminating taxes on tips and overtime pay, a key message in places like Las Vegas, where many workers in the service industry rely on that income. The president is also tying the policy directly to the stakes of the midterm elections.
And we got to win the midterms. If we don't, these policies are going to be taken away from you. The taxes are going to go through the roof.
Democrats are criticizing the cuts, saying they benefit the wealthy and corporations. But President Trump says they voted to increase taxes for everyone.
We can never forget that every single radical left Democrat in Congress voted to deny the American people these life-saving changes. They voted for tax increases. They wanted your taxes to go up.
The president is in Phoenix, Arizona today. He is set to speak at a Turning Point USA event titled Build the Red Wall. President Trump appearing alongside Erica Kirk and several Republican members of Congress from Arizona.
President Trump says his administration is looking into reports of missing and deceased U.S. scientists.
The president calling the situation serious, noting that some of those involved were, in his words, very important people.
Based on what you've been briefed, what do you think is happening here, and do you think that this is connected or totally random?
Well, I hope it's random, but we're going to know in the next week and a half. I just left a meeting on that subject, so pretty serious stuff, but we're going to be hopefully I don't know, coincidence, if you whatever you want to call it. But some of them were very important people, and we're going to look at it over the next short period.
The White House says reviewing reports that some of the individuals had access to sensitive research, such as nuclear or aerospace material.
Some lawmakers are also calling for a federal investigation. Congressman Tim Burchett saying last month the numbers seemed very high in certain areas of research.
And Democrat Analilia Meja has won a special election in New Jersey's 11th congressional district. She will now fill the seat vacated by Governor Mikey Sherrill. Meja defeating Republican Joe Hathaway by roughly 40 points. The win narrows the Republican majority in the House from 217 to 214. The district has trended Democratic in recent years. Meja has ran on a progressive platform including Medicare for all, student debt forgiveness, as well as abolishing ICE. Hathaway campaigned on tax relief, lower energy costs, and support for law enforcement. The special election fills the remainder of Sherrill's term. Voters will return to the polls in June for a primary, followed by the general election in November.
The California governor's race is shifting after former Congressman Eric Swalwell's exit from the contest. A new Emerson College poll shows 2 Republicans leading the field, with a large share of voters still undecided. Christina Corona has the details.
In the first poll since Eric Swalwell's departure, the California governor's race is being reshaped. A new Emerson College poll conducted April 14th through 15th among 1,000 likely voters shows the field shifting. It finds 2 Republicans now leading the race. Former Fox News host Steve Hilton leads with around 17%, followed by Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco at 14.4%. Billionaire Tom Steyer is close behind with 14.1%. Former Health Secretary Javier Becerra and former Congresswoman Katie Porter each come in at just over 10%, while San Jose Mayor Matt Mahan trails at a little over 5% with 23% of voters undecided. As for priorities, Hilton is focusing on cutting taxes, expanding home ownership, and addressing homelessness.
Common sense and sanity on homelessness. It's very simple. 1, enforce the law. It is illegal to live and camp on the streets. It's always been illegal. If local leaders won't enforce the law, I will. I will use state law enforcement resources to get people off the streets. Number 2, get them into mental health treatment. Number 3, get them into addiction treatment.
Bianco is prioritizing public safety along with tackling affordability and housing.
For public safety, we will actually make crime a crime again in this state. Every single prison that Newsom closed, there is 5, he's about to close 2 more, I will reopen on day 1.
And Steyer is campaigning on affordability, education, and housing.
But I'm also in favor of building 1 million houses. And the ability to do that is not just, there's no silver bullet. We need to deal with zoning. And we also need to build houses much cheaper on a per square foot basis, which we can do with new technology.
A governor's debate is set for April 22nd in San Francisco, featuring the 6 candidates polling about 5%. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. faces pointed questions as well as bipartisan praise from lawmakers on Capitol Hill.
NTD's correspondent Jason Blair has the key takeaways from yesterday's hearing.
Parents across the country demanded change, and we are delivering it. We are ending the era of federal policies that fueled the chronic disease epidemic.
Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. testified before the House Ways and Means Committee discussing some of his department's priorities. Kennedy started by laying out some of the accomplishments at HHS.
We flipped the food pyramid upside down. We negotiated most favored nation drug prices. More than 40% of the food industry is committed to phase out petroleum-based dyes. We're protecting children from sex-rejecting procedures that expose them to irreversible harm. We're strengthening oversight of organ procurement. We're also cracking down on waste, fraud, and abuse.
Kennedy received praise from Republicans and some Democrats for some of the work HHS is doing.
You've given a voice to the reality that Americans do not believe that the healthcare status quo works for them.
I want to begin by thanking you for your leadership on an issue that is very important to me and so many Americans, and that is ending the inhumane and outdated animal testing in this country.
I just want to thank you for pointing out stuff like the dyes and stuff in food, and maybe even the looking at the food pyramid.
Kennedy also responded to criticism of the department's changes to vaccine guidance and messaging.
And in some cases, you've even taken unilateral actions, like you did last May when you rolled back COVID-19 vaccine guidance for pregnant women.
But I was appalled to learn that the CDC suspended public health messaging on vaccines. Did President Trump approve your decision to end CDC's pro-vaccine public messaging campaign?
You've got a lot of misinformation.
Kennedy also commented on hospice fraud in California.
We've already shut down 500 hospices in Los Angeles. Incidentally, we haven't had one call from Congress or anybody else about complaining because clearly these were fraudulent.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will be testifying again later this morning in front of the House Committee on Education and Workforce.
We'll be examining the policies and the priorities of the Department of Health and Human Services. And of course, we'll be covering that live for you right here on NTD News.
And as Secretary Kennedy testifies before Congress, what do everyday folks think about his Make America Healthy Again initiatives?
NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
What do you make of the president's Make America Healthy Again initiatives?
Oh, absolutely essential. I mean, people need to do it. It's just not food, it's everything else that has to be combined. And I think what you're going to see down the road, because of Make Healthy Again, people are going to live longer. Not only are they going to live longer, they're going to live happier.
I mean, I like the initiative to try and make America healthy again. I mean, if you look at our obesity rates compared to other nations, it's astronomical. This goes back to the food additives. You know, everything that's in our food that we're eating, consuming is just not great.
Unfortunately, the drug companies kind of run the country and they want people sick, so it's definitely going to be a challenge.
I like the Pete Hegseth challenge, you know, doing 100 push-ups and 50 pull-ups. You know, I've tried that a couple of times. I failed miserably, but I think it's a really good idea.
We eat on the run, and we don't eat very healthy, and we might not feel it as a in our youth, but we start feeling it as we get older.
Yeah, I definitely support that. I know that we have a lot of stuff in America that is not even legal to serve as food in like Europe and other countries. I think a lot of that is just stuff that's thrown in there that does not benefit us in terms of health whatsoever.
How do you think Secretary Kennedy has impacted the way we talk about public health?
Well, again, his transparency and bringing it up. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Too long we've been told it's only the experts that know what they're doing. And it's not true. And it's just like, you know, for a lot of, during COVID, some of the things that were going on, a lot of us knew they were wrong, but people were afraid to step up and say that. He's taken down those walls.
We try not to buy any food with artificial dyes or any of that kind of stuff. So I'm glad that they're bringing it to the attention and getting these big companies to stop using it. I think that's so important. I think Europe already has banned all that stuff, so I think we definitely need to in our country.
Finally, he's kind of against the vaccines, which I agree with. I agree that I'm not against vaccines, but I think the vaccines should be looked at a little more closely in terms of what's necessary and what isn't. I just feel in general we pump ourselves full of a lot of unnecessary things today.
I think that the reform that he's doing is the right track. I think that he has a lot of vision to make this the country better and healthier again. It's just there's a lot of blockers in his way, and it's a matter of how to move those blockers out.
And singer David has been arrested in connection with the murder of a teen whose body was found in the trunk of a Tesla.
Yeah, LA police say the 21-year-old singer, whose real name is David Burke, is being held without bail. The body of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found in September of last year, following reports of a foul odor coming from the impounded Tesla.
The vehicle, registered to Burke, was found abandoned in the Hollywood Hills. Hernandez was 13 years old when she had been reported missing in April 2024. Police say investigators will present the case to the district attorney's office for consideration of charges. David went viral on TikTok in 2022 with the hit Romantic Homicide song, which peaked at number 4 on Billboard's Hot Rock Alternative Songs chart. Coming up, in an overnight vote on Capitol Hill, lawmakers extending a controversial Spy Powers Act for 10 days.
This last resort coming after a night of chaos on the House floor.
Welcome back. After a night of intensity on the House floor, lawmakers on Capitol Hill extending a controversial Spy Powers Act for 10 days.
The move last night buys Republican leaders more time to negotiate a deal with holdouts in their own party. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has that update.
Let me be clear at the outset. We cannot allow Section 702 to lapse, not at a moment where our adversaries are expanding their capabilities, accelerating their operations, and exploiting every gap in our intelligence posture. Allowing this authority to expire would leave the United States blind to threats that move at the speed of the modern conflict.
FISA is a surveillance law that allows the government to gather foreign intelligence, but several lawmakers have raised concerns that Section 702 of FISA doesn't have guardrails to protect Americans' privacy.
I think we need warrants. I think anytime something's done in secret, to me, is scary to me, and maybe that's an oversimplification, but we've had so many abuses, thousands of abuses in the past. I know they've created.
Early Thursday night, House Speaker Mike Johnson thought they reached a deal with GOP holdouts. He brought up a 5-year extension with reforms, but it failed, with 12 Republicans joining Democrats to oppose it.
There have been real bipartisan discussions about adding civil liberties and safeguards. Some members support them, some oppose them, but just about everyone agrees that this is serious stuff. The kind of debate that Congress ought to have in the open.
Later, a clean 18-month extension met with even greater pushback. GOP opposition grew from 12 to 20 holdouts. That's despite President Trump calling on Republicans several times to unite around the clean extension. The president had said that FISA was abused even against him, but when used correctly, it's, quote, one of the reasons we've had such tremendous success on the battlefield. As a last resort, lawmakers allowed a short extension of Section 702 through unanimous consent. The House Speaker is optimistic that a deal will be reached by the new deadline on April 30th.
What we're trying to do is thread the needle of ensuring that we have this essential tool to keep Americans safe, but also safeguard our constitutional rights, and making sure that the abuses of FISA in the past are no longer possible.
The Senate still must take it up, and the president must sign it into law before Monday to prevent a lapse in the government's spy powers. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
As the shutdown at the Department of Homeland Security continues, Republicans are pushing for a solution without Democratic support. At the same time, officials warn that key investigations are going unfunded. NTD's Chris Bob has the latest from Washington.
We're literally funding our own adversaries through that fraud.
Yes.
Yeah.
That warning comes as congressional Republicans try to break the 2-month-long DHS funding stalemate by turning to budget reconciliation. It would allow them to move immigration funding with a simple majority. Officials warn that vital investigations, including those targeting fraud, are going unfunded. GOP leaders are aiming small. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has called for a slimmed-down bill focused on ICE and Border Patrol, a strategy House Speaker Mike Johnson is backing to move it quickly. Lawmakers reacting with their thoughts.
I would rather fund it as a standalone DHS appropriations bill.
If it comes down to it, will you vote?
I mean, yeah, if it's the whole thing, if it's in reconciliation. I don't have confidence that we're even going to have a third reconciliation. So I'm going to fight to make sure that we get all the policy wins that we need in this reconciliation.
That approach is running into resistance from within the party.
We'll just see. We'll see what else is attached to it.
There needs to be full funding to the end of the Trump term so that you have full funding of all agencies within the Department of Homeland Security.
Meanwhile, officials say the prolonged shutdown is already impacting operations across DHS, including investigative work, intelligence networks, and victim support.
There's a misinformation that with the big beautiful bill, ICE is completely funded. That can only be used for certain tasks. It doesn't involve Homeland Security investigations. Our critical intelligence network is a lot contract based, and we're just not able to pay for those contracts right now. Our victim advocates, victim specialists, we just don't have that. So the CCP is a huge threat. HSI actually broke the largest gift card fraud case ever, and it was from transnational gangs within the CCP that were sending that money back to military units in China. And that all came from gift card fraud here in the United States.
Democrats argue the shutdown is the result of Republican infighting. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer posting on X, quote, "Democrats are not the ones dragging this shutdown on. This all falls on the Senate GOP and House GOP, who are too busy fighting with each other. Republicans say they're working to fully fund Homeland Security and blame Democrats for refusing to support the effort.
Republicans will continue to do our job fully funding the mission of Homeland Security. It's shameful that the Democrats refuse to do that. They're playing politics with the security of the American people.
With the June 1st deadline set by President Trump fast approaching, pressure is building on lawmakers to reach some form of consensus. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Chris Bobb, NTD News.
Thank you, Chris. And the acting director of ICE is stepping down. The Department of Homeland Security saying Todd Lyons will leave the agency and move to the private sector. Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen says Lyons was a key player in helping the Trump administration remove violent criminals from American communities. Mullen also saying Lyons helped revitalize the agency after years of restrictions. Lyons has led ICE since March of 2025 after being appointed by then DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. His last day is set for May 31st.
And on Capitol Hill, a push to counter China's efforts to steal advanced American AI tech. Lawmakers are pointing to what could be the largest export ban violation in U.S. history. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more on that.
China's smuggling of advanced AI chips is a pervasive threat.
In the AI race, China is buying what it can and stealing what it can't due to current U.S. export restrictions.
Since they don't have enough AI chips to develop the models on their own, they prefer to simply steal them from their American competitors.
Lawmakers on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party say China is months or years behind the U.S., so it relies on smuggling networks to get restricted technology.
We should all be deeply concerned by how far Chinese companies are willing to go to gain an edge, even if it means breaking the law.
Last month, the DOJ charged 3 men with stealing $2.5 billion worth of AI servers with restricted NVIDIA chips and sending them to China,
which would be the largest export control violation in U.S. history.
And panelists say they're already using the technology against the U.S. military.
Right now, Chinese AI developed from stolen American technology is helping Iran target American warfighters.
Rival companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google are now working together, sharing intelligence through a new industry working group to detect and stop the Chinese Communist Party's IP theft.
If Chinese AI models win, we face a future filled with censorship and surveillance.
And the panelists say that the export restrictions should go further, applying to all chips, not just our best.
Providing China with cutting-edge AI chips is the modern equivalent of selling rockets to the Soviets during the moon race.
The lawmakers and panelists stood in support of the Match Act, which would ban the sale and servicing of chip-making equipment to China and also call on U.S. allies to do the same. For NTD News Washington, I'm Jack Bradley.
Thank you, Jack. And now the latest move by the Trump administration to counter adversaries in the Western Hemisphere.
The State Department is expanding visa restrictions.
The new measures apply to foreign nationals who support or carry out activities linked to hostile powers.
The earlier policy focused on individuals linked to the Chinese Communist Party operating in Central America.
That framework has now been expanded to the entire hemisphere and includes other adversary countries and their agents. The State Department saying 26 individuals have already been hit with restrictions under the expanded policy. And their identities, though, have not been made public.
Those targeted and their immediate family members will be barred from entering the U.S.
The Coast Guard says it's offloaded thousands of pounds of cocaine seized in the Eastern Pacific. Officials saying more than 3,800 pounds, worth nearly $29 million, was brought ashore in Miami. The Coast Guard says the drugs were seized during 2 interdictions as part of Operation Pacific Viper. Authorities say the amount of cocaine seized was enough to kill nearly 1.5 million or so amount of citizens. The Eastern Pacific remains a major route for drug traffickers into the United States. The Coast Guard says it has already seized more than 200,000 pounds of cocaine and apprehended 160 suspected narco-terrorists since just August last year. Still to come, a massive triumphal arch proposed by President Trump is moving one step closer to reality.
That's right. It's part of a big plan to celebrate America's 250th birthday in Washington, D.C. this July.
6 days after the splashdown of NASA's Artemis II mission, the 4 astronauts discussed the impact the historic lunar flyby had on them personally. Welcome back. President Trump's plan for a massive triumphal arch near Washington, D.C., given the go-ahead by a federal panel.
That's right. The U.S. Commission of Fine Arts voting unanimously to advance the project to its next stage.
The 250-foot structure is planned as a landmark to mark the nation's 250th anniversary.
The design includes eagles, lions, and the inscriptions, "One Nation Under God," and "Liberty and Justice for All." The arch would be built on an island near the Lincoln Memorial and Arlington National Cemetery.
But the proposal is already facing legal challenges from critics who say it would interfere with the historic sightline between the Lincoln Memorial and Arlington House, among other concerns.
The plans for the arch are part of a push to mark the nation's 250th anniversary with large-scale public events. Organizers are also planning a nationwide state fair-style celebration on the National Mall, and that would feature exhibits, food, and showcase all of the 50 states and the U.S. territory. So sounds like that'll be quite a party.
Right, that sounds like a lot of fun.
If you like food and general cheer.
And celebrating.
And you might have a good time at this particular event, yeah. If that's your sort of thing, you know.
Right.
I was checking out arches around the world, and of course, very much modeled on the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, right there. That was, of course, to commemorate, the end of the war. The closest thing we have in the U.S. is right here in New York City. We have in Washington Square Park. Yes. We have a similar arch, but this one would be significantly higher than any other arch around the world. But they have one in London, Mumbai, Rome, even in North Korea. They have taken this design. So very popular design for commemoration.
Indeed. Yeah, it's actually that Washington Square Arch is just really beautiful and a site for bringing people together around important events. I remember doing some Christmas caroling there one year, and there were lots of people gathered around. It's a really nice way to bring people together.
Yeah, what makes that arch very unique is that Fifth Avenue is actually starting right north of the park. And so if you're kind of looking south on Fifth Avenue, what you get is that beautiful view of the arch. So.
Yeah, so it would change the sight line, but maybe in a nice way, I assume. All right, fresh off their historic trip around the moon, the Artemis II astronauts spoke with reporters yesterday at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Yeah, the crew, they took questions and they shared some of their personal stories. NTD's Sean Marshall has more on that.
The Artemis II astronauts shared their experiences and took a few questions Thursday in a press briefing at Johnson Space Center.
The astronauts' creed is always to launch as friends and land as friends. And when you live together in a small group for as long as you do on the space station or even 10 days, it's a challenge. But I am here to tell the world, we launched as friends and we came back as best friends.
Each spoke of what the journey around the moon meant for them and how it made them feel about their place in the cosmos.
What I've noticed, which is completely different from my first flight, and surprisingly so, since my first flight was so long, is every time I've been waking up, or in the first few days, I thought I was floating. 100%. I truly thought I was floating, and I had to convince myself I wasn't.
But when the drogues cut away, we went back to free fall, and watching that on the video felt almost the same way it felt in the video, or in the vehicle. I would tell you, I've never been base jumping, I've never been skydiving, but if you dove off a skyscraper backwards, that's what it felt like for 5 seconds. And then the mains, the pilots and the mains came out, and it was glorious.
Saw so many amazing things. When people ask what's the most amazing one, and you can't pick one. There's just so many amazing experiences we had. But overall, where I keep coming back to is what kept grabbing my attention when the lighting was right and we were looking out the window is that I kept seeing this depth to, I guess, the galaxy, for what we were visually observing out there, this depth to the galaxy that I just had never experienced before. And it's not that I could tell which stars were really closer and further, because it has to do with how bright they are, but because of how bright they are and their differences, they look like you can tell where they are in 3D. That was mind-blowing for me. It's very hard to fully grasp what we just went through. And in these short, you just said it's been a week since we've been back, but it's been a week of medical testing, physical testing, doctors, science objectives. We have not had that decompression. We have not had that reflection time. So I'm basing this on what we saw. And when the sun eclipsed behind the moon, I think all four of us, I turned to Victor and I said, I don't think humanity has evolved to the point of being able to comprehend what we are looking at right now, because it was otherworldly. It was amazing.
During Artemis 2's nearly 10-day mission, the astronauts voyaged deeper into space than the moon explorers of decades past and captured views of the lunar far side never witnessed before by human eyes. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
Incredible to get those insights there. And I know we've spoken with some really excellent interviewees, some of them who are veterans, and talk about the kind of bonding that you get when you go through a really epic experience, such as being in battle together, and you become like family. And I can't imagine, in a similar vein, how this kind of experience would forge that bond. But according to NASA, the final total on Integrity's odometer is 694,481 miles, or just over a shade over 1.1 million kilometers. So quite the distance they travel together.
Wow, you think about a car, it gets over 100,000, you're like,
yeah,
there's a lot on this odometer.
There's quite the road trip.
Well, also, when that last clip of him where he says, when we went and the sun eclipsed and we were just behind the moon,
yeah.
He couldn't even put it into words, and it makes me think of that Pink Floyd album, The Dark Side of the Moon. Yeah. People have been thinking about this for quite some time and making art about it, and to see his reaction to actually experiencing it, quite a moment for humanity.
I'm glad they did find a way to put it into words. Get some of that insight. All right.
Well, we do have to wrap things up here. It's been quite a fun week with you, Steph. But look, if you have some stories you'd like to see us cover, we won't know unless you shoot us an email. Let us know what you'd like to see us cover. You can do that at goodmorning@ntd.com.
For round-the-clock original news coverage, you can always watch us live at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. I'm Stephanie Cox.
I'm Carrie Dunst. Have a great weekend.